Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, I have for you 3 true scary stories to keep you company while you're at work. But before we begin, I wanted to let you know that I have 2 new prints available at my shop, and also because I'm inspired a lot by Halloween. I've been making lately these creepy tooth charms, so if you're interested in purchasing one, you can visit my shop. The link is below. But for now, guys, grab your flashlight and follow me into the darkness. Let me tell you about the Heartbrook Hospital murders. They called him a monster. The guy who killed those 5 people, all of them sick. I guess he was a monster in the moral sense, but the rest, especially the part about him being inhuman, is all baloney. We like narratives, as humans, structure, flow. We want heroes and villains, victims, all the stuff that makes life feel more like a movie written and directed by other human beings, rather than a mad, stupid clusterfuck with no beginning, middle, or end. There's some bitter and comfort in all that cliché. I reckon that's why it all got blown up to urban legend status, 'cause you can apply a narrative to it. Some kind of meaning beyond damn old randomness. Order amongst chaos, like trying to straighten out a 10-mile slinky. Everyone can sleep a little easier if the big bad boogeyman has a face, which strikes me as kinda funny, personally, because the guy who killed all those people barely had a face at all. His name was Patrick Russo, or Pat, to his drinking buddies. I know this because I was under the employ of his wife for a few months before everything went septic. He wasn't a murderer back then, and he certainly wasn't a mass killer either. No, Pat was just another cheating lowlife, one among millions. I'm not a cop, just a private investigator, and spying on people like Pat is my bread and butter. The day human beings stop being horny and unfaithful, I'll be a hungry woman, living out on the streets. Probably this is why I tend to avoid relationships like Ebola. I've seen it firsthand, time and time again. Monogamy is just another lie we tell ourselves to feel better about how short life is. Before you judge me for my cynicism, I recommend you hear me out. See if you can bring yourself to understand my point of view. Pat's wife, Lydia, was a funny little woman. Made me think of a vole or some other small rodent, wearing an "I'd like to speak to the manager please" wig. I've made a lot of money from people like her. They were paranoiacs, all of them, but usually justified in their fears. Something about a woman like that just seems to be a magnet for cheaters. Best to get a read on your clients as well as your targets. Never know when you're working for a maniac, keeping tabs on their unlucky, unwilling, and usually unaware victims-to-be. Women like Lydia were always neurotic bags of loose nerves, but barely ever truly dangerous. She just wanted me to keep tabs on her husband, make sure the only place he was keeping his dick, in her absence, was in his pants or suspended a good 6.5 inches above a urinal while he's taking a piss. Truth be told, it was more boring than anything else. He was a slave to routine, work, bar, home. The golden trifecta of blue-collar America. I'd come to recognize that white noise and horseshoe haircut was scratched into the skin of my inner eyelids. Life for those few months felt like I was becoming an extra on The Sopranos. Thankfully, before I could go insane, Patty Cakes finally slipped up. I found him in the back room of a dinner after closing time, balls deep in a waitress half his age, which by my best estimate would make her around 22. Took some real pretty pictures of that, some of my best, I think. Lydia didn't seem to appreciate that. That dirty cheating son of a bitch! She yelled at me through tidal waves of tears, like I was the one showing her husband's dick into a stranger. How the fuck could he do this to me? I just shrugged, knowing it's often better to not get involved to the messy, emotional side of things. I knew that my photos would be instrumental to her case. She paid me, and I left. I have done my part. It was no longer my problem. If a dollar bill I'd used to buy a soda on Monday morning is shoved into a stack used to buy a half-gram of coke on Thursday night, I'd hardly been complicit in the drug deal, right? The Russo case was one of those times. Now, nobody can ever really know what happened on that night with 100% certainty. Even with all my research, evidence, and eyewitness testimonials, I can only ever manage a good 80% of the best of days. Some tiny, shameful part of me doesn't even want to know. But that part of me isn't who I am. The reason the Russo case, better known by members of the public as the Russo tragedy, impacts me so deeply is that without my paid meddling services, the whole damn thing never would have happened. Lydia cooked dinner like normal, we know that much. A nice, medium-rare steak, one of Pat's favorite meals. She never let on what she knew, but she knew being that Pat was a cheating bastard, and that she'd stuff his steak with crushed-up sleeping medication. The big log would be out like a light in no time. With the strength only a pissed-off neurotic housewife could master, he's dragged his unconscious carcass into the sedan and drove him all the way out into the Farbrook woods. Poor damn bastard slept like a baby the whole time. He'd never know what grand designs Lydia had in mind for him until it was far too late. A few minutes of angry driving later, Pat's been shoved out of the car onto the wet mud of the forest floor. It sucks him in, embraces him like a lover, like any of his lovers. One last act of infidelity while he was still human. Not even this woke him up. He only wakes up when something wet splashes his face. A steady, consistent stream of liquid. After that, he's rousing, for sure. Probably wondering something like, Jesus Christ, is somebody pissing on my face? And it was one of the 5 occasions in recorded human history when getting a golden shower was a preferable alternative to the reality of the situation. That reality being Pat looking up with drowsy eyes, still barely able to move his body, and seeing his wife standing above him, emptying a can of lighter fluid onto his face. I never really found out what facial expression Lydia was wearing at the time, but I bet my bottom dollar she was smiling. Yeah, smiling like the mousy suburban sociopath that she was. Maybe he said something, maybe he just dismissed it as a crazy dream and tried to go back to sleep. It doesn't really matter. What did matter, though, was Lydia lighting up a match and tossing it onto poor Pat's hydrocarbon-doused face. Went up like a fucking Christmas tree. Pat's up and screaming in no time, but Lydia doesn't want to watch him burn. She's a maniac, sure, but not a sadist. While Pat's wailing about the skin bubbling and peeling off his skull, Lydia takes out a snub-nosed revolver and shoots herself in the side of the head. Here's another thing worth keeping in mind, though, another little difference between movies and reality. The average person is an absolute moron when it comes to guns, and Lydia was no exception. She had the gun pressed to her head and pulled the trigger, but still could not manage to kill herself. There's been a lot of debate about how exactly she managed to fuck up, about whether she fired too early, had the gun at an awkward angle, or let the recoil throw off the trajectory of her shot. Nobody really knows for certain. What we do know for certain is that the bullet splatters a deep ridge through Lydia's cranial cap, leaving a dam-sized hole in her scalp. It's messy and agonizing, blood everywhere, but not fatal. Lydia collapsed to the ground and fainted in a rapidly growing puddle of her own blood. While this little fiasco was going on, Pat just screamed and burned. People do stupid things in moments of pure terror. Pat's stupid thing was trying to pull the fire off of his face, as though it were some kind of wild animal, just squeezing and yanking on it. All he ends up doing is pulling off smoldering chunks of Pat that stink like burnt meat. One of his eyes is buried under a flap of melted eyelid and pops in the heat. The other remains operational enough to see the parts of his face hit in the mud with such little plops. He knows he doesn't look like Pat anymore. Hell, he knows he doesn't really look like anyone now. Freddy Krueger's left nut would call him ugly. In an instant of clarity, Pat shoves his burning face into a mound of wet earth. The fire's finally over, but the pain never will be, not for the rest of his life. With one good eye and no face to speak of, he runs off into the woods in panic and confusion as police cruisers, alerted by the sound of Lydia's gunshot, converged on the scene of the crime. Lydia, the criminal, the abuser, the torturer, and would-be killer, was carried off to hospital. Her husband, who she's done a fantastic job of disfiguring, was placed on every wanted list in town for shooting his wife in the head. Justice ain't always just. That's another one of those movie things, a common misconception. I'd love to tell you this flaming nightmare ended there, that this story's sad ending was Pat running off into the woods, never to be seen again. That's not true, though. The fact is, things would only get into really deep shit when Pat came back. In the meantime, Lydia was in hospital, recovering, wrapped in more bandages than an Egyptian mummy. I visited her once. I'd heard about the incident, wondering what the hell had happened and how much of it had been my fault. She didn't respond to me, just remained in a sort of catatonic state. She was like that for days on end, while her husband, despite being the most recognizable man in America, was nowhere to be seen. He was out there, that was for sure, licking his wounds, biding his time, waiting for a chance to get back. It happened far sooner than anyone could have ever expected. A lot of people in the years since have been saying it was a fire axe, perhaps inspired by childhood viewings of The Shining and the Friday the 13th sequels. Applied narratives. Pat, though smaller than that, out in the woods, he just happened to get his hands on a rusty old hatchet, the kind you only need one hand to hold. He knew that his wife was in the hospital, and he had a pretty good idea of the war too. Farbrook Hospital was understaffed, especially during night shifts, so it's no wonder he managed to slip in totally unnoticed. One smashed window later, the creature that used to be Bat Russo was roaming the bleach-stained halls of the hospital, the hatchet dangling from his fingers, searching for his wife, for the person that betrayed him as he betrayed her. I don't like making excuses for adultery. Again, I'd be out of job without it. But I don't think you need to be an expert to know that burning someone alive was a hell of a lot worse than engaging in an extramarital affair. I think it went without saying that Lydia never expected him to live, and it was that little oversight that cost Lydia her life. Pat found the ward, and there were 5 people on it, all women, all horribly injured, all bandaged up and dressed in medical smokes. See, Pat's one eye wasn't too good anymore, not after the fire. He could perceive movement and outlines, but the finer details were lost to him. He was blind to all that. As a result, he could not even begin to tell which of these women were his wife. He knew one of them was. He recognized the ward from the local news and from prior trips to the hospital. However, enraged by grief and confusion and agony, Pat didn't want to leave the hospital empty-handed after all this work. No, he intended to make it worth the trip. He went from bed to bed, bringing down the hatchet in cruel, swift blows that split foreheads and smashed faces. Red stains spread out over bandages as arms and legs twitched feebly. Pat murdered every last person on the ward, all 5 of them, leaving the walls around them Jackson Pollocked with deep shades of red and purple. Lydia was among the slaughtered, though she was afforded no special treatment. Pat, after all, never did recognize her. Once the Farbrook Hospital murders were done, Pat climbed back out of the same window he smashed his way into. People would find the remnants of the massacre the next morning, and I'd find out that very afternoon. Of course, not being a cop, I wasn't allowed onto the active crime scene. The details, though, they spread like herpes on a college campus. Farbrook was well known as a town where nothing happened, so a mass murder committed by some deformed freak was probably the most interesting event to occur since the town's founding over 100 years prior. While local law enforcement was still trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what the hell happened, I had the ultimate clue just dropped into my lap. A text from Lydia's phone. It didn't take a genius to figure out who must have sent it, or the fact that whoever sent it must have read mine and Lydia's correspondence. Pat knew everything now, the whole nightmarish story and my involvement in it. Meet me at Owl Creek Bridge, the text read. Come alone. Bring a gun if you want. It was sent on the night that Lydia burned him, a few hours before it happened. Who knows what Pat had planned for me before things went totally balls-to-the-wall insane. Another thing you learn, being a private detective, is just how damn easy it is to find a person's house when you know their name and number. Privacy is a myth. So with the risk of Pat appearing above my bed at night and smashing his hatchet into my face, I decided that meeting him on his own terms was the best option. After all, he might not have even been angry, not at me at least. I was standing on the rickety wooden skeleton of Owl Creek Bridge the next day. The guardrail probably amounted to wigs and duct tape, so I avoided it, not wanting to lean too far forward and tumble into the rushing waters below. I took a deep breath that seemed to go on forever. When I heard heavy footsteps on the bridge behind me, I knew it could only be one person. I have expected you to not turn up. Glad you did though. Wanted to do this soon, he said, though some words were mispronounced due to a lack of lips. Tamara, is it? Silently, I gulped and turned to face him. It was like having every mistake I'd ever made staring back at me, eyes to eye, judgment. The wrapped flesh of Pat's cycloptic face looked like it was weaved out of nightmares, a mix of deep black, anemic white, and pale red, teeth exposed under ragged flags where lips once lived. That one eye, now cloudy and half blind, seemed to swivel around under a chunk of exposed bone where a normal human being would have had an eyebrow. In his hand, as expected, was the same awful hatchet he'd used to murder all of those people. We stood about 10 feet apart, and Pat was afraid enough to keep his distance. So it was you, he said, slurring. You're the one who spied on me. I nodded. And you're the one who told Lydia about the cheating, and that's what made her to do all this. His tongue, it seemed to have a mind of its own. I'm sorry about what happened to you, I said. I never intended that. But that doesn't mean what you've done is right. You murdered 4 innocent people. Pat just sighed and groaned. He probably would have been sobbing if his tear ducts hadn't sealed up. She'd made me look like a monster, he said. It only makes sense that I started acting like one. Imagine what happened next. Do you picture Pat raising his axe and lunging on me? Us, engaging in a high-octane battle to the death on that rickety old bridge? If you do, then you've not learned much about either of us. You're too busy applying your narrative, the one you'd be most comfortable with. Pat never attacked me. He just walked over to the guardrail and stared out over the water. It was me that walked up behind him, took the gun out of my pocket, and shot him through the back of his head, not because I thought I'd enjoy it, or because I thought he'd attack me, but because in that moment it just felt like the right thing to do. There were no clear bad guys here, no evil mastermind, just victims and victimizers, and overlap between the categories. Pat's corpse collapsed against the guardrail, crushing it, and fell face first into the rushing waters below. It carried him and the hatchet off to some other place, where maybe he'd finally find peace. I wished that on him, more than anything, that gruesome mess had finally been cleaned up. Then again, that's not entirely true, is it? That's trying to fit everything into that neat little 3-act structure again, when life, hideous, nightmarish tornado that is, refuses any such categorization. We can't all just go back to our lives after something like that, putting it in some box in the back of our minds, and stowing it away until we needed it again. Bullshit. That's not how that works. That's never been how that works. I still wake up in the middle of the night now and then, broken out into a cold sweat, terrified that I'll see Pat looming over me with his hatchet, or the mutilated grin of Lydia Russo as she prepared to set me ablaze. Those impressions still linger, and probably will until I finally drop dead, every bit as permanent as burn scars, but with none of the visibility. I'll hear the hatchet now and then scraping down the halls of my home, Pat screaming, the sound of the gunshot that deformed Lydia and killed Pat, echoing off the walls. Those sounds, disembodied and abstract, will keep on playing forever and ever, until something concrete comes to fill them, until the wet, muddy boots of the monster's Pat will land on my doorstep. But hey, what let it worry you? Keep putting distance between yourself and what transpired. Cast the players in your head, make characters of them, assign them their roles, apply narratives, apply cliches, anything that helps you sleep at night. As long as you remember, it's only a story, and stories can't hurt you, can they? Hey there, editors. I've got a pretty wild story to share with you. Not looking for advice. This is more like a warning. I recently started an intern position at a big company. The office building was a pretty old and kind of run down. On my first day, a co-worker who had been assigned to show me the ropes pointed out that there was no floor 13 listed on the elevator panel. It goes straight from 12 to 14. I laughed about it. Superstition, am I right? And then didn't think about it again for months. A week ago, I volunteered to stay late and finish up some work in the hope that my intern job might turn into something more permanent if I showed enough initiative. By the time I finished, it was 8 o'clock at night, and as far as I knew, I was the only person in the entire building. I was pretty tired, so when I got to the elevator, I slouched against the wall and watched the little blinky light thing count down the floors. 19, 17, 16, 15, 14, and then the elevator stopped. We've all seen movies on TV shows where an elevator gets stuck between floors and someone opens the doors to a view of a brick wall. I figured that's what had happened. The elevator stopped between floors 14 and 12, so I was surprised when I pressed the door open button and saw a dark corridor instead of a wall. The button panel was no longer working, so I decided to leave the elevator and take the stairs down, rather than press the call button and wait for someone to come rescue me. The light switch near the elevator didn't work, which made sense. Clearly, there had been some sort of power failure and the elevator had stopped at floor 14 or 12. I used my phone as a flashlight instead. I had never been to any floor but the one I worked on, and I was immediately taken aback by how neglected the place looked. There was a thick layer of dust everywhere, and when I got into an office area, all of the desks were bare. Some were sagging or falling apart. The entire floor looked as if it had been abandoned for years, which was strange, because I had been told that the whole building was occupied. I went to the nearest window, intending to see how far the power failure had spread, and got a fright when I saw that it was completely pitch black outside. The light from my phone just barely illuminated the face of the nearest building across a narrow alleyway. And looking further down the street, there wasn't a hint of light. No street lights, no illuminated windows, nothing. For a moment, I thought there had been a major power failure, like the one that hit New York in the previous decade, and then realized that I couldn't even see car headlights. I could not hear any cars either, or any sound at all. It was as quiet as the grave. How did that make any sense? So, I went immediately to the staircase leading down to the ground floor, only to find it locked shut with a rusty chain. That made no sense at all. That staircase was a fire exit. Why would someone chain it shut? Why did it look as if it had been in that state for years? I decided to hunt around for a key. As I searched the smaller rooms, I came across a number of very weird things. One of them was filled with what looked like mold. In another, I found a suit made out of a strange heavy material, folded on a chair in such a way that it looked like a person sitting there. Nearly gave me a heart attack. Some of the desk drawers had papers filled with gibberish in them. A filing cabinet was filled with dusty light bulbs. After about 20 minutes of this, I found a rusty key hanging up in a supply closet and had locked the chain. This place was starting to spook me, and I was looking forward to coming back in the daylight to find out what the hell this deal was. But the door didn't open. I got a glimpse of a long bare corridor before my phone's light caught something moving. Something that had round pale eyes. Something very much not human. I ran for it, back toward the elevator. The thing chased me. Its footsteps were shuffling and awkward, but fast, and I could hear its wheezing breath at my back. When I got to the hallway leading to the elevator, the door started to close. I'd like to tell you I escaped by doing some cool action movie stunts, maybe rolling in between the doors just as they shut, but I honestly don't remember how I got away. All I recall is running faster than I thought possible, propelled by the most intense terror I've ever experienced. It wasn't the creature chasing me I was necessarily afraid of. It was the fear of being stuck in that place. In those few seconds before I reached safety, my conscious mind accepted the idea that had been growing ever since my arrival on floor 13. I had stumbled into a place I should not have been, and if I didn't escape now, then I never would. The last thing I saw before the elevator doors closed were the creature's round eyes, bobbing in the light. A few seconds later, I emerged into a bright lobby, the sounds of traffic coming in from outside, and collapsed to my knees. I've since quit that job. I no longer ride in elevators that have a missing floor. I am not sure either of those precautions guarantee safety. I keep remembering the dark, silent city I saw outside the office window. Whatever that place is, I think it's big, and there are probably a lot of ways to enter it. I wonder how many missing person cases are the result of an experience like mine that didn't turn out so well. First of all, completely true. I work at a candy store in a small historic town in North Carolina. The house at the candy store is over 100 years old and has had multiple residents through the years. It's been known that the place might be haunted, as we have multiple customers come to us and say that they see a woman standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at them. All of the customers say that she is an older woman with an old-fashioned dress. Okay, kinda weird. Whatever. My boss never really thought much of it. It took about a month for anything to really start happening to me personally. I started seeing shadows out the corner of my eye while I was closing up. I could swear it was a person standing there, so it scared me, thinking someone had walked in after closing. Nothing is ever there when I turn to check. I usually end up walking all the way through the house just to make sure no one had broken in. That went on for a few weeks, and then I would start hearing banging upstairs where the bathroom and storage rooms are. I never checked it until the other night, when it was just so loud that I had to at least make sure nothing was getting broken up there. I walked up there, and as soon as I got to the middle of the stairs, the banging stopped. I thought it was coming from the bathroom, so I got to make sure everything is intact, which it was. I checked both of the storage rooms. Nothing. Whatever. Probably the ghost messing with me. I start back down the stairs, and then something starts rapidly banging on the door once I get to the middle of the steps. I stop dead in my tracks, as this was so loud that it legitimately rattled my nerves a little bit. I walk back up there, and it stops again. At this point, I'm pretty nervous and just run back downstairs to finish closing, so I can get the hell out of there. As I am briskly returning to the candy store portion of the house, I hear banging, the loudest I've heard it yet, and it sounds like pans and jars are being thrown everywhere up there. Then I hear stomping, and like someone is sprinting as fast as they can back and forth. I don't want to deal with it anymore, and at this point I'm scared shitless, so I just lock the door and leave. As I'm turning to look at the house from the outside, I can see the light upstairs turn on. The next day, today, I return. Everything's quiet. I try to pretend that I never heard anything. I go through my day like normal. Nothing weird happens, blah blah blah. Well, it's closing time again. I'm counting out the register, and I see someone standing near the entrance. I go to tell them we're closed, and of course, no one is there. Great. Note this again. I continue counting out the register, and I hear running from upstairs again. Then I hear a blood-curdling scream. What the fuck? I run up the stairs, stupidly expecting to see something, and of course, nothing is there. I check both storage rooms. Nothing. Okay, this is getting weird. Did that scream came from the outside? So, I go look around the house and no one is there. I take a deep breath and walk back in. When I get to the door, it's locked. I don't lock it. Why am I locked out? The keys were still inside, so I had no choice but to climb through the window on the side of the house. It is open from the window air conditioner we have installed in it. I hear a huge fucking bang from upstairs and everything rattles. Okay, I'm going to fucking get to the bottom of this. I run upstairs, swing open the storage room door and start just throwing shit. I start unstacking the huge stack of boxes that's against the wall, and that's when I saw it. There was a small closet in the wall. Ha! Never noticed that before. I go to open it, and there's a pull chain light fixture, so I pull it, and a dim light flickers on. The closet is empty, except for piles of what looked like dirt that was directly in the center of the closet. It was in 3 small, perfectly formed piles. What the fuck? Okay, whatever. This is fucking creepy. I switch the light off and close the door. Right as I close the door, I could see through the gap underneath the door that the light switched back on. I decide to just get the fuck out of there. As I am walking out of the room, I hear the creaking of the closet door opening again. I hear a deep voice whispering, didn't recognize the language, and footsteps coming up behind me. I fucking slam the shit out of the door, sprint down the stairs, and grab my keys. As I was leaving, I heard a kid laughing. When I got home, I discovered that I had 3 scratch marks on my side and 1 on the back of my neck, which were burning like fucking crazy. I don't want to go back tomorrow. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. And if you like my videos and want to see more, subscribe to my channel. And I will see you all in my next video.